This day in sports history. And welcome back to This Day in Sports History. It is January 9th, and on this day, we had a basketball coach wearing a bulletproof vest on the bench. An incredible winning streak finally came to an end, and Randy Moss shot the moon. Sort of. Those stories plus a non-sports fun fact about George Washington that has absolutely nothing to do with cherry trees. That's all coming your way. Stick around to the end. But let's start with what happened on this day back in 1971 when Frank McGuire's South Carolina Gamecocks traveled to College Park, Maryland to play Lefty Driesell's Terrapins. Now, this game was heavily influenced by what happened in the team's first meeting that season back on December 16, 1970 in Columbia, South Carolina. In that first game, with under 5 minutes to play and South Carolina holding a commanding lead, a couple of players got into a shoving match that escalated quickly into a benches-clearing brawl. Driesell, in an attempt to pull players apart, took a couple of punches to the face from South Carolina player John Ribach. The melee lasted more than 4 minutes before Columbia police officers reached the court and finally put a stop to it. The game officials ended the game right there with time still on the clock, and South Carolina declared the winner 96-70. A furious South Carolina athletics director, Paul Dietzel, banned reporters from the Maryland locker room, but Driesell defied that ban and conducted interviews with the few reporters actually covering the game that night, sporting visible bruises on his face and a cut lip. Driesell called the fight a disgrace and said, "If I was Frank McGuire, I wouldn't bring my team to College Park." And when McGuire heard Lefty's quote, he responded by saying, "I'll never be afraid of Lefty Driesell." Maryland filed a protest the following day to have the game ruled no contest since the final 5 minutes of the game were never played. That protest was denied, though. So, that set the backdrop for the game on this night in Cole Fieldhouse. South Carolina actually tried to get this game canceled due to what they felt would be unsafe playing conditions. That was also denied. So when the teams took the court on this night, the teams were a bit nervous about what might happen, and McGuire was even wearing a bulletproof vest under his suit jacket on the bench. The 3 or 4 media members who had covered the first game had ballooned to nearly 50 print, radio, and television journalists ready to record the bloody action that was anticipated. But there was not any blood. Heck, there was hardly any basketball. South Carolina was ranked number 2 in the country at this point, and they started out in a 2-3 zone. Well, Driesell did not think that his Terps would play very well against that defense, and so without a shot clock, decided to hold the ball to force the Gamecocks to play man-to-man instead. Well, the Cocks didn't budge. They stayed in the zone, and the Terps held the ball. South Carolina players crossed their arms. Some yawned. One even struck up a conversation with some folks in the first row as Maryland held the basketball. On the television broadcast for this game, the announcers actually read from the U.S. Constitution and then later the Canterbury Tales, while Maryland's Jim O'Brien stood like a statue with the ball near midcourt, or Howard White dribbled the ball incessantly with zero intent of doing anything with it. Maryland hit a shot with a second remaining on the first half clock to take a 4-3 lead into the locker room at halftime. In the second half, South Carolina finally relented and started guarding man-on-man. The pace of the game picked up a little bit in the second half, and by the end of regulation, the game was tied at 23. South Carolina took a 5-point lead in the overtime with 24 seconds to play. After scoring just 4 points in the first 20 minutes, Maryland managed 6 in the final 20 seconds, hitting an uncontested layup, and then came up with 2 steals on the subsequent inbound passes and scored 2 quick buckets to upset number 2 South Carolina 31-30. After the game, the Maryland crowd sang the Amen chorus for the first time, a tradition that continues on to this day. The fight in December, along with the slowdown game on this night, were two of the factors South Carolina used when deciding to leave the ACC 2 months later.
And that's the end of the first half. As the teams head to the locker room, the Spartans lead the Bulldogs by a score.
You guys stink.
Geez, Coach, we're only down a couple of points.
No, I mean you guys really smell. You need to hit the showers. And here, I got every one of you new bars of soap from the Sterling Soap Company. Each bar is artisan crafted using natural ingredients and essential oils. They also have shave soaps, colognes, beard balm, and a whole lot more. Now get in there.
But Coach, we have another half to play.
I don't care. I can't stand to be around you.
A few minutes later.
All right, bring it in tight. You guys are still playing terrible, but you're smelling great out there. Now listen, you're going to need to stock up for the rest of the season. We got a lot of tough games left. So go to sterlingsoap.com after the game. That's STIRLING soap.com. You got that?
Yes, Coach.
Great. sterlingsoap.com on 3. 1, 2, 3. sterlingsoap.com.
On this day in 1972, the Milwaukee Bucks beat the Los Angeles Lakers 120-104, ending the Lakers' winning streak at 33 games. This was the defending NBA champ Milwaukee Bucks with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar against the Los Angeles Lakers with Wilt Chamberlain at the tail end of his career. Keith Jackson was in the house that night, calling the action for ABC.
This is the first time they have played here this season. Here is Abdul-Jabbar inside against Chamberlain. He got it.
By this point in the streak, the Lakers had blown away the previous record for consecutive wins, which had been set just the season before by the Bucks, when they won 20 straight. The Lakers had not lost a game since October 31st of 1971. They tied Milwaukee's streak with an overtime win over Phoenix on December 10th, and then won their 33rd consecutive with a 44-point thrashing of Atlanta 2 nights before this one. The Lakers had already beaten the Bucks earlier in the streak with a 7-point win in LA back in November. This was a tight back-and-forth game through the first 3 quarters until the Bucks blew the game open with an 18-2 run, which turned a 2-point game into a double-digit lead. And Kareem was a huge part of that.
6:40 to play. Oscar back to Jabbar. Slammed up. Jabbar over Chamberlain. Won't go. Tips it in.
But this Bucks team also featured the Big O, Oscar Robertson, who still had a few years left in the league. He had 17 points and 9 assists in this one.
It has been said that this man with the ball, Oscar Robertson, is the most stabilizing influence in basketball. We'll see. John Gluck. Boy, I'll tell you, he's torn a hole in the Lakers today. Oscar drives. Flips it back to Jabbar.
Robertson's talent was not only on display on this night, but throughout the season. He would make his 12th consecutive and final All-Star appearance that season. Kareem ended up with 39 points and 20 rebounds in the win against the Lakers. LA's 33-game winning streak is still the longest in major professional sports history. On this day in 1963, Art Modell fired Paul Brown as coach of the Cleveland Browns. Now, Paul Brown was a beloved coach, and the team was even named after him. Modell was the front man for a group of New Yorkers who purchased the team back in 1961. A bit unlike coaching changes now, which tend to happen hours or a day or two following the team's final game of the season, Modell waited 3 weeks after the Browns closed out the 1962 season with a 7-6-1 record. Now, there is speculation that Modell waited to make his decision to time it with a writer's strike in the Cleveland area, meaning there would not be anything written about the firing in the local papers. Brown had been the coach in Cleveland since 1946, compiling 167 wins against 53 losses in his 17 seasons there. He won 7 championships, 3 of those in the NFL, with his last coming in 1955. His only losing season as a coach of the Browns was in 1956. He was a true innovator of the game. He was the first to develop a playbook.
Here's a football team with a textbook. players insert the mimeographed pages into a binder, and many hours are spent in study.
He was also the first to do film study, and not just on other teams, but also his own.
We will be grading you during the regular season. It's easy to think somebody's doing a heck of a job, and then you get the pictures, and you find some guy that you hadn't thought much about is doing better than the guy you thought was doing a heck of a job. It's detailed, scientific study. The pictures never lie.
He took control of the play calling by using a shuttle system with his offensive guards. Prior to that, quarterbacks had called the plays in the huddle.
Cleveland coach Paul Brown uses his signal calling shuttle system as he sends guard Chuck Noll into the game with the play.
He was the first to put coaches in a high-up vantage point during a game and then hook up a telephone connection between them and the sideline to get real-time information on formations and situations. And he was also the first to put a face mask on a helmet to protect his players. That came after a nasty injury to his star quarterback Otto Graham on November 15, 1953, which caused a cut to his face that required 15 stitches. Graham became the first player to play with a face mask in pro football.
Paul Brown came up with a great big plastic thing about 2 inches high, a half-inch thick. I couldn't breathe properly to bounce back, and I couldn't see.
I said to the Riddell person that handled our account, make me a thing no bigger than the size of my little finger.
At the time of the firing, Brown was 54 years old, truly a living legend, and he was loved by most everybody in Northeast Ohio. And his departure caused a seismic shift in the NFL. Brown said a rift developed between him and Modell, and was quoted as saying Modell wanted to take a more active part in the actual team aspects, formerly assigned to me as part of my contract. Well, that rift apparently started just after Modell bought the club, when Brown traded 2 players to bring in the current Heisman Trophy winner, running back Ernie Davis, without consulting Modell. Modell tried to regain control of the situation by negotiating Davis's contract without input from Brown, and then apparently overpaid him and then put pressure on the coach by guaranteeing a championship. Now, in the aftermath of his firing in 1963, Brown spearheaded the formation of the Cincinnati Bengals, who started playing in 1968 and then joined the NFL in 1970 after the merger with the AFL. With the Bengals, Brown coached 8 seasons and he won a little less than half his games there. Paul's son Mike said years later that getting the Bengals up and running was his dad's redemption. It was very glorious in the old days when we played Modell's Browns, and when we won, we rejoiced in that. After the 1976 season, Paul left the sidelines, serving as vice president and general manager of the Bengals until he passed away in August 1991 at the age of 82. Brown's successor in Cleveland was Blanton Collier, who guided Cleveland to the NFL title in 1964, but that is the last time the Browns have won or even played in a championship. Modell would of course go on to more infamy when he moved the Browns out of Cleveland after the 1995 season and firing another soon-to-be legendary coach, Bill Belichick, a few weeks later. But his decision to fire Paul Brown on this day in 1963 was his first questionable decision as an owner. And in 2005, Minnesota Vikings receiver Randy Moss had a rather memorable touchdown celebration at Lambeau Field against Green Bay. This was a wild card playoff game. The Packers had just scored at the start of the fourth quarter to cut the Vikings' lead to 7. Minnesota drove down the field and Dante Culpepper found his favorite target for the 6. Here's Joe Buck and Chris Collinsworth with the call for Fox that day.
The Vikings are not inside field goal range for Morton Anderson. Culpepper, Moss. Randy Moss is in for a touchdown.
Playing off, bit up on the route, and Randy Moss, without even really being able to run, as he shoots the moon to the fans.
Now, what most people remember, at least if you were watching the Fox broadcast, was Buck's over-the-top reaction to Moss's fake moon.
That is a disgusting act by Randy Moss, and it's unfortunate that we had that on our air live. That is disgusting by Randy Moss.
Moss later defended the celebration by saying, well, that's how Packers fans would greet them when they arrived at the stadium and then send them off to the airport after a win. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. George Washington loved dogs, no matter whether they were one of his hounds or somebody else's, even if it was the enemy's dog. During the Battle of Germantown in 1777, one of his soldiers found the dog roaming around. When he showed Washington, he noticed the dog belonged to British General William Howe. After he cleaned the dog up a bit and wrote a brief note to Howe, Washington called a ceasefire and returned the dog to the general. That's all I've got for you today. Come on back tomorrow for another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.